The emergency room was buzzing with urgency. Nurses rushed between stations, monitors beeped in scattered rhythm, and the smell of antiseptic clung heavily in the air. Amid the noise, a stretcher wheeled in through the double doors. On it lay a frail, unconscious man with greying hair, sunken cheeks, and cracked hands. His name tag read Gerald Knox, 62. Collapsed in his apartment, one EMT said, as they transferred him to a gurney. No known allergies, no ID beyond this. He handed a worn wallet to the attending nurse. A few feet away, the hospital administrator frowned as he scanned the system. He's been here before, he murmured, pulling up old files. No insurance, no next of kin listed. He still owes us from 3 years ago, over $20,000, the nurse sighed. What do we do if he can't pay this time either? The administrator rubbed his temples. We stabilize him, but we don't extend overnight care beyond what's necessary without a payer. Just then, an alert blinked on his screen. Payment confirmed. He stared. Wait, what? A full payment, not just for the new charges, but for the entire outstanding balance, had just clicked. An anonymous wire transfer. No name, no message. Only a reference code, MK92. Somebody just paid everything, the administrator said, still puzzled. Everything. Down the hall, a young woman in a navy blue coat stood silently by the vending machine. Her eyes, warm but distant, were fixed on the ER doors. She didn't speak. She didn't approach. She simply watched through the small rectangular window, watching as they stabilized the man on the stretcher. The man who had once looked her in the eyes and said, "You were never my responsibility." She clutched her coat tighter, exhaled quietly, and turned to leave. But as she moved down the hallway, the elderly janitor mopping near the elevator stopped mid-swipe. He looked up, squinted, and studied her face. He recognized her, not just from a memory, but from another life. "Maya," he whispered, though she was already gone. She was the same girl he once told to get out of his house, the orphan no one wanted. Yet here she was, paying for his life, silently. 18 years ago, the air was thick with silence in the Knox household when a caseworker pulled up in front of the faded brick home in a quiet suburb of Indianapolis. In the back seat sat Maya, 10 years old, thin as a branch, her big brown eyes taking in the unfamiliar world behind fogged-up glasses. Her parents had died 2 months earlier in a brutal car accident. Since then, she'd been moved from one temporary home to another, until social services tracked down her only known relative, Gerald Knox, her late mother's half-brother. The door creaked open. Gerald stood in it, wearing a stained undershirt and holding a half-empty bottle of beer. He looked at Maya like she was an overdue bill. "Come on in," the caseworker said gently, nudging Maya forward. Gerald barely moved. "I told you all on the phone. We don't got room for a kid, especially not one that ain't mine. She's your niece, Mr. Knox. She's a burden," he muttered, stepping aside. Angela, Gerald's wife, emerged behind him, soft-spoken and always looking down. Angela tried to offer a smile. "We'll make it work," she said quickly, avoiding her husband's glare. Inside, Maya was shown to the basement. No sheets on the mattress, one dim bulb, cold concrete walls. That would be her room. Meanwhile, upstairs, Gerald's son Bryce, then 14, had a room full of sports trophies, comic books, and every gadget a boy could want. Maya didn't complain. She didn't know how. She sat on the basement bed, knees hugged to her chest, and counted the water drips from the exposed pipe. From the start, Gerald treated her like a mistake that wouldn't go away. "Don't touch my things. Don't eat more than you need. Don't think this is permanent." Angela made her sandwiches when she could, left little notes on napkins, but Angela was always careful, always watching Gerald's mood. She was too afraid to speak up when Maya was made to stay home during holidays while the others travelled, too afraid to question why Maya's clothes never got new replacements, why she wore Bryce's hand-me-downs. Still, Maya was brilliant, quiet, curious, always reading. She excelled in school, won spelling bees, solved math problems years ahead of her grade. Teachers called the house to praise her. Gerald never answered. Bryce called her a charity case and mocked her when she read books at the dinner table. By 16, Maya had saved money from tutoring neighborhood kids and secretly working weekends at a local bookstore. One night, Gerald walked in drunk and tossed a garbage bag full of her clothes at her feet. "You're old enough now," he slurred. "Go figure out your life. You were never our responsibility." Angela stood by the kitchen sink, crying silently. Bryce laughed from the couch. Maya didn't argue. She packed what little she had, took her school books, and left. No hugs, no goodbyes. She didn't look back. 12 years later, Maya sat in her modest but cozy office downtown, surrounded by clean lines, soft lighting, and photos of happy clients she'd helped get out of debt or save for their children's futures. She ran a boutique financial planning firm, the kind that catered to everyday people. Her days were filled with spreadsheets, calls, and consultations. She liked it that way, clean, predictable, controlled. Her phone rang. "Maya Clarkson?" the voice asked. "Yes, I'm calling from St. Michael's Hospital. We had your number on file from a past inquiry. An anonymous patient was just brought in. No ID, no insurance. Your contact was attached to a reference code." She frowned. "I haven't listed myself as an emergency contact for anyone." The voice paused. "The name is Gerald Knox." The silence on her end was sharp. "I'm sorry. Who?" "Gerald Knox. Collapsed in his apartment. The code on his records links back to a note from years ago. Something someone entered on your behalf when your mother was treated here. It's the only contact we found." Maya's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained calm. "I understand. Thank you for letting me know." She hung up. The past she had buried under years of therapy, hard work, and quiet forgiveness had clawed its way back. Gerald Knox. She stared out the window, remembering the way he had stood in that doorway 18 years ago, the way he looked at her like she was nothing. Now he was in the same hospital where her mother died, helpless, nameless, alone. She stood up slowly, grabbed her coat and walked out. It was the final year of high school, and Maya was thriving academically despite everything stacked against her. Top of her class, National Honor Society. Teachers said she had a future, a real one. But it all came crashing down one quiet afternoon in the school counselor's office. "Maya, your tuition hasn't been paid," the counselor said gently. "We sent the invoice to your guardians months ago, but the school hasn't received a response. Without payment, we can't guarantee your place next semester." Maya nodded slowly, swallowing hard. She already knew Gerald had ignored it. She just hadn't wanted it confirmed. That evening, she stood quietly in the living room as Gerald watched TV with a beer in hand. Angela was folding laundry nearby. "I need help with the school fees," Maya said softly, clutching the paper in her hand. "They said I might not be able to finish the year." Gerald didn't even look at her. "And what's that got to do with me? I was told you're listed as my guardian." He turned to her now, his eyes sharp with irritation. "You're not my child. I didn't sign up to put you through school. You should be grateful I put a roof over your head this long. Find your own way." Angela didn't speak. She just kept folding. But later that night, she came into the basement while Maya was packing her things. "I can't go against him," she whispered. "But here." She slipped a small envelope into Maya's bag. It held 3 crumpled bills, barely enough to last a week. "I'm sorry," Angela added. "I really did try." It was the only time Angela ever defied him, the only time she chose Maya. Maya didn't say anything. She didn't cry. She just nodded, zipped up her bag, and walked out into the night with nothing but her school books, a second-hand laptop, and a heart full of determination. For months, she worked double shifts at a local diner, pouring coffee, wiping down counters, getting tips barely enough to keep gas in her car. She studied at night in the back booth or in the library before it closed. She slept in that car, parked behind the gas station, hoping no one would notice. One day, during a late tutoring session at school, Mrs. Langford, her math teacher, found her dozing off between problems. "Maya, are you all right?" Maya tried to shrug it off. "Just a little tired." Mrs. Langford paused. She saw the worn hoodie, the bruises under her eyes, the stack of library books in her bag. She didn't ask more, but 2 weeks later, she called Maya into her classroom. "I nominated you for something. You might get a call." "A scholarship?" Mrs. Langford smiled, more like a miracle. The scholarship came through. Full tuition, living stipend, even housing. Maya stood frozen as she read the acceptance letter, hands trembling, lips pressed together to keep from crying in front of the office staff. She left town 2 weeks later, quietly and without fanfare. She never said goodbye. She never looked back. Now, at 28, Maya stood silently outside room 416 at St. Michael's Hospital, staring through the glass window. Gerald Knox lay motionless on the hospital bed, oxygen tube in his nose. His hands, once harsh and always gripping a beer or a remote, were now limp frail, sunken into the sheets. The man who once loomed over her with scorn looked small, empty, beaten by time. A nurse adjusted the IV, glanced at Maya briefly, then walked away. Maya didn't enter. She just stood there, watching, remembering. Her heart pounded in her chest. Rage, pity, grief, they all clashed inside her like storms. She walked away. Back home, she sat on the couch, staring at her laptop screen, unable to concentrate. She opened a drawer, pulled out an old photo, the only one she had left from her childhood, her parents, smiling, alive. She whispered, "You'd want me to do the right thing." The next morning, the hospital's finance department received an anonymous wire transfer, enough to cover all of Gerald's medical expenses, including his outstanding debt from years prior. No name, no return contact. Just a note, paid in full. And somewhere down the hallway, the janitor who saw her the day before whispered to a nurse, "I think I've seen that girl before, a long time ago." Gerald Knox used to walk with a proud step, back when the sign outside his modest auto repair shop read, "Knox and Sons," even though there was only one son, Bryce, and Bryce never cared much for the business. Gerald bragged about Bryce constantly, how he got into a decent college, how he'd eventually take over. "He's going to be somebody," he used to say over beers with his few drinking buddies. But the truth unraveled fast. Bryce dropped out by sophomore year. He got arrested for driving under the influence, then again for possession. Gerald bailed him out both times, mortgaging part of the house to do it. He was humiliated, angry, but still believed, or needed to believe, that Bryce would come around. Then came the embezzlement. Quiet, calculated. Bryce siphoned thousands from the business account, slowly bleeding the shop dry. One day, he vanished. No note, no call, no apology. Just gone. By then, Angela was already fighting her own battle. Late-stage breast cancer. She had begged Gerald to come with her to chemo. Sometimes he did, but mostly he didn't. He'd stopped talking much, started drinking earlier in the day. Angela died in a hospice facility, with only a nurse by her side. The shop closed the following year. Gerald couldn't pay the rent. Then the house was foreclosed. His drinking worsened. At 62, he lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment where the power went out often and the roof leaked when it rained. He was a man undone, not by one event, but by every decision he'd ever made and refused to acknowledge. Maya, now in her late 20s, woke early every morning, despite being her own boss. Her financial firm was small but respected, especially among non-profits and young professionals. She had clients who trusted her, young women she mentored at the shelter who looked up to her, and even a few awards on her office wall. But her apartment was always spotless, almost sterile. No framed family photos, no boyfriend's jacket hanging over a chair, just structure, routine, and work. People called her driven, focused. But her therapist, a kind but direct woman named Dr. Palmer, wasn't fooled. "You do everything for everyone except yourself," Dr. Palmer said during one session. "You don't let anyone in. You help, you rescue, but you don't let yourself feel." Maya sighed. "I don't have time for feeling. You make time for everything else." Dr. Palmer leaned forward, voice gentle but firm. "You can't heal if you haven't let go, and you haven't let go of him. Not truly. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't even mean reconciling. Sometimes forgiving is not for them. It's for you." At the hospital, Gerald's condition was stable, but far from improving. He drifted in and out of lucidity. His memory, once sharp with scorn, was now dull around the edges. But his room began to change. Fresh fruit appeared on his side table. New blankets replaced the scratchy ones. Books, biographies, classics, a Bible began to stack beside him. No one claimed responsibility, not even the staff. But the janitor noticed. The same janitor who had seen the young woman standing silently in the hallway weeks earlier, the one with the soft eyes and the quiet pain. He began seeing her more frequently, slipping in early, always leaving before visiting hours ended, never talking to anyone. She wore plain clothes, kept her head down, and always left something behind. A thermos of soup, clean socks, once even a photo of St. Michael's Hospital garden. One day, as she was leaving, he stepped in her path. "I remember you." She froze. "You used to sit out back," he said, "by the step. After your parents died, you'd cry where no one could see." Maya looked away, her mouth opening slightly, then closing. Her throat tightened. Her heart pounded in her ears. "You were just a little," he said gently. "We all thought you'd disappeared." Tears spilled from her eyes without warning. The kind of tears that come from somewhere so buried you forget they exist until they're rising fast. "I never meant to come back," she whispered, voice cracking. I don't know why I did." The janitor didn't interrupt. He just nodded, stepped aside and said softly, "Whatever the reason, maybe it was time." Maya walked out that evening under heavy skies. It rained before she reached the car, but she didn't run. She let it soak through her shirt, into her skin, into the memory of that little girl, sitting alone on the back steps of a hospital that took her parents, but gave her nothing in return. For the first time in over a decade, she cried for them, and for herself. Gerald blinked awake to the sterile hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic. The morning light leaked through the narrow blinds. For a long moment, he didn't know where he was. The last thing he remembered was stumbling to the bathroom in his cramped apartment, clutching his chest, and then nothing. A nurse entered, checking his vitals. She smiled politely. "You're awake. That's good. You gave us a scare." He mumbled. "Where am I?" "St. Michael's Hospital," she said gently. "You were admitted 3 nights ago." He turned his head slowly, pain pulsing behind his ribs. "I don't have insurance," he croaked. "No family, no one." The nurse paused, checking his chart. "Well, your bills are taken care of. All of them." He stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean someone paid. For everything. Your past due balance, the emergency costs, even post-discharge care. We were surprised too." Gerald's mind swam with confusion. "Who?" "I'm afraid we don't know," she said kindly. "They insisted on remaining anonymous." When she left, Gerald lay there, staring at the ceiling. It didn't make sense. Who would do that? He had nothing, had no one, until he saw the small note tucked beneath the water glass on his side table, folded carefully, written in familiar slanted handwriting. "We are not always remembered by what we gave. Sometimes we are remembered by what we failed to give. M.K. His breath hitched. M.K. For a moment he thought it couldn't possibly be. But then, like a match struck in darkness, memory flared. A girl, quiet, small, dark hair, always writing in that old notebook. He had come home drunk one night and snatched the notebook from her hands, irritated by the scratching of her pen. "What the hell is this?" he slurred, flipping through it. "Maya Knox," she'd whispered, barely meeting his eyes. "I was just practicing my initials." He laughed cruelly. "M.K. Like you're someone important. You think you're part of this family. That name doesn't belong to you." She never wrote them again in front of him. Gerald closed his eyes now and covered his face with one shaking hand. A soft knock came at the door. He looked up, expecting another nurse. Instead, it was a calm-faced woman with a clipboard, early 40s, professional. "Mr. Knox?" "Yeah?" "I'm with County Services. A care assistant has been arranged for you upon release. Daily support, meals, medication, errands." "I can't afford that," he said instantly. "You don't have to," she replied. "It's already paid in full." He squinted at her, voice brittle. "By who?" "I'm not authorized to say," she replied. "I was simply told to ensure you're not left alone after discharge." He stared at her, as if waiting for the punchline. "You're telling me someone did all this for me?" She nodded gently. "Sometimes people surprise us." With that, she left. Gerald sat in stunned silence, the note still trembling in his hands. Maya Knox. She had been 10, alone, dumped on his doorstep like a stray. He remembered the phone call from social services, how Angela had tried to sound optimistic, how he'd refused to make space for the girl, shoved her into the cold basement, because Bryce needed his room undisturbed. He remembered every time he'd brushed off her school papers, every eye roll, every cruel mutter of burden, charity case, or not my child. She was 16 when he told her, flat out, "You're old enough. Go figure out your life. You were never our responsibility." And she had left. No crying, no scene, just silence. He never thought about her again, until now. Now he couldn't stop thinking about her. He saw her face as a child, wide-eyed and hopeful. He saw her eating silently at the far end of the table while Bryce talked endlessly about his grades and friends. He remembered her standing outside in the cold, waiting for a ride that never came after school events he never attended. And now she had come back, not with revenge, not with anger, but with quiet mercy. She had seen him helpless, stripped of dignity, money, pride, and she had paid his debt without seeking recognition. Gerald felt the shame crush down on him like a weight he could barely hold. "I don't deserve it," he whispered to the empty room. He gripped the note tighter, chest rising with broken breaths. "I don't deserve her." He covered his face, but this time it wasn't to hide pain. It was to hide the sobs that burst from his chest like floodwaters. He wept, not from loneliness, but from the soul-deep realization that someone he had thrown away had carried the weight of compassion he'd never once shown, and somehow she still bore his name. Weeks had passed since Gerald Knox was discharged from St. Michael's. Now, he rested in a modest but clean care facility just outside the city. The nurses were kind, the food was warm, and every month, like clockwork, the payments for his room and care arrived on time, but always without a name. He no longer asked who was behind it. He knew. He spent most of his days in quiet reflection. Sometimes he reread the small note with the initials MK until the ink seemed to blur. Not once did Maya visit, and that somehow hurt more than if she had come to scream at him. She had chosen grace over vengeance, and it was that grace that haunted him. Maya stood inside the community centre on a rainy Saturday morning, the scent of crayons and old books mingling in the air. A small circle of foster girls sat around her, giggling, doodling, nibbling on cookies. One girl, no older than 10, looked up at her suddenly with eyes too wise for her age. "Miss Maya," she asked softly, "do people always hurt the ones they're supposed to love?" The room fell silent for a beat. Maya swallowed. "No," she said, gently brushing a curl from the girl's forehead. "But sometimes they do." "Why?" Maya looked at her, really looked, and saw a piece of herself in the child's tentative voice. "Because they're hurting too," she said slowly. "Or broken, or scared. But that doesn't make it right." The girl nodded, eyes still fixed on hers. Maya smiled, her voice quiet but certain. "We don't have to become like them. We can choose differently." The girl leaned into her, and Maya held her for a moment longer than usual. That evening, Maya returned home to her small but beautifully lit apartment. She set down her keys, kicked off her shoes, and found Jordan in the kitchen, stirring tea. "You always show up when I need a quiet moment," she teased. Jordan smiled. "I just bring the tea. You bring the calm." They sat on the balcony as the rain tapped against the railings. The city glowed below them. After a long silence, Maya finally said, "I think I want to slow down." Jordan looked over at her. "Take a step back from work. Maybe breathe. Maybe open some doors I've kept shut." He didn't push. He just nodded, offering her a warm look and the space to speak, or not. "I've been surviving for so long, I forgot what it meant to actually live," she admitted. Jordan said nothing, but the way he gently placed his hand over hers said everything. The next morning, Maya sat at her desk and filled out the paperwork. She wrote the check, signed the forms, and sealed the envelope. The Angela Fund, a college scholarship dedicated to girls aging out of foster care, girls who might need one small act of quiet kindness to change their entire future. She named it not after herself, but after the one person who had, just once, slipped her a folded envelope with a few crumpled bills. A moment of defiance that had given her enough hope to hold on. Angela had been gentle, quiet, overlooked. But Maya remembered. Now, through this fund, so would others. Maya stepped outside, took a deep breath, and let the sunlight warm her face. She was no longer the forgotten girl in the basement. She was the woman who had chosen grace. The afternoon sun cast long golden beams through the window of the care home's common room. Gerald Knox sat quietly in his wheelchair, staring out at the small garden beyond the glass. A patch of roses someone tended to with far more love than he had once understood. A nurse approached gently, holding a small brown package. "This came for you," she said softly, placing it in his lap. Gerald blinked, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single photograph, old, slightly faded, of a smiling young girl standing between two beaming parents. Maya, with her mother and father, before tragedy touched her life. Behind the photo was a letter. He unfolded it with care, his eyes taking in each word as though they carried weight too heavy for paper. "You taught me what not to become. That was your gift, even if you didn't know it. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." MK. Gerald stared at the words for a long time. Then slowly his body began to shake. Tears spilled down his cheeks. Not the quick, embarrassed kind, but deep, racking sobs that came from somewhere far beyond shame. He clutched the photo to his chest, as if holding on to a second chance that would never fully come. He whispered, to no one in particular, "I'm sorry." Outside, across the garden, the silhouette of a woman moved through the light. Maya. She didn't look back. Her head was held high, her stride calm, steady. She walked past the gates, through the sun-soaked trees lining the street, her heart unburdened for the first time in years. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need closure. She had something far more powerful: freedom. Hi besties, thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe.